presentation.
I just tapped.
First, we have Muhammad Fawad Khan. He will be presenting on creating an organic material processing network for renewable energy. So I'm going to stop my share and he'll start his share.
I think you might need to enable participant screen sharing.
Do we know who's in charge of that now?
Okay, I think I got it here.
Perfect.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, everyone, thanks for coming to my presentation. My name is Fawad. I'm a master's student in chemical engineering at UMD, Go Bulldogs. I'm looking at the viability of creating an organic material processing network in central Minnesota. I'm actually working with the University of Minnesota's RSDP program and Regional Sustainable Development Partnership Program for short. And then what we're doing is we're working with a sustainability startup company called the Dragonfly E. Our first step was to figure out like what are the problems that are being caused in our society currently when it comes to food waste. One of the biggest things was the generation and landfilling of food waste. If you take a look over here on the left, in 2019, around 229 million tons of food were produced in the United States, out of which 148 were eaten, and then the rest were uneaten. And if you look over here, all of that uneaten food was technically called surplus food, and it cost around $500 billion just to produce as well as be transported, whether it was to landfills, incinerators, or recycling, or just to donation centers. The second problem we're looking at is greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in the same year, around 6.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide were produced. Now, to put that into perspective for you guys, here's a picture of New York City, and you can see that entire volume is around 100 million tons of CO2. So just imagine how much 6.6 billion tons would be. That's a lot. It's like 66 times that amount. Two of the sources of greenhouse gases that we were focused on were one, which was the breakdown of food waste in landfills. And then the second one was the diesel usage in the agricultural industry. So the solution we came up with, anaerobic digestion. So we decided all of the organic waste, not just food waste, but also like crop waste, wastewater, animal manure, that should all be directed towards an anaerobic digester. It could be a network across the country. It could be a network within a smaller region, even with the one we're focusing on in central Minnesota. What's nice about this is the food waste is still going to break down. Instead, it's just going to be in a controlled and optimized environment. And then it'll produce biogas and digest it as products. I'll talk a little bit more about digested later, but biogas is essentially just 50 to 75% methane in composition. It's pretty good to be used for generating heat and electricity, but if you want to take it one step further, you can actually create biomethane, which is 96 to 98% methane. And another common term for that is renewable natural gas, or RNG for short. Not only can you use it to generate heat and electricity, but now you can also inject it into the gas grid because now it meets those requirements. You can use it to create transport fuel. You can also use it to create hydrogen fuel cells or just hydrogen fuel in general. So why choose anaerobic digestion? Well, first of all, the environmental benefits. So it diverts food waste away from landfills and therefore also reduces your greenhouse gas emissions from those same landfills. You can optimize methane production, produce clean renewable fuel, so like we talked about, which was biomethane and hydrogen, reduces our dependence on fossil fuels. There are some economic benefits to it too, so it can provide a reliable source of renewable energy. Recent studies have shown that you can get up to $33 of electricity per ton of waste. So just imagine what 50 million tons of waste could do. And I think once I did the calculations about how much waste Minnesota generates, that's enough to power around 25,000 homes per year, which was an interesting statistic that I found. It's cost effective and self-sustaining. Cost effective in the sense that composting takes around 3 months to a year on average, whereas anaerobic digestion literally takes like 10 to 30 days. So that's a lot quicker. It's self-sustaining, so it requires such low energy that it can literally power itself. It produces a useful byproduct. So that digestate that I talked about in the last slide, that was the second product. You can use that as a biofertilizer or even a soil amendment instead of just throwing it away. Local economies can benefit by minimizing their waste bill, so local businesses as well as households. Some social benefits for it is, because you're sending less waste to landfills, you can reduce hazards such as odor, smoke, and pests to nearby communities. Another thing that I found was if we were to tap into the entire US's biogas potential, we could add as many as 360,000 jobs across the country. Super interesting to find. So far, we've identified the problem and even drafted a solution to solve it. Where I come in is to do research on determining the viability of this implementation. So far I've developed educational materials to inform the local community in central Minnesota about what we're doing and what we hope to accomplish. So I've created brochures, flyers. We even have a website that I'll have you guys check out after the presentation. I've created surveys, and we're in the process of starting to conduct virtual interviews to just understand how do people manage their waste from households all the way up to businesses and industries in central Minnesota. That's a picture of what the survey looks like. And then finally, establish sustainable partnerships with community members. So whether they're, again, households or businesses, and just kind of create like a network. And then another thing that I'm working on is just applying for federal aid. So just get funding to move the project forward. And that's pretty much it. You guys can feel free to go to the website. That's the link. It's best viewed on a computer, but if it's easier for you, pull out your phones and snap a picture. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Muhammad. We can leave that up for a minute. And my apologies, I forgot to ask the judges to introduce themselves before we started the second session. So if you guys would be willing to unmute and do that now, thank you.
Hi, I'll start. It looks like we just have a minute for questions. So should we go to questions and then introduce ourselves, or?
Maybe questions first, yeah, sorry.
Okay, cool, because I have one of those too. Thank you so much for the presentation. Sounds like a great solution. So I understand the approach, but can you help me understand how the project would be implemented?
So you're talking about how are we going to implement the creating the network?
Yeah.
So right now we're trying to collect information about where the organic waste is coming from. So locations in central Minnesota. I think there's like 14 counties. And so we're trying to figure out where is everything located so we can optimize where we locate the anaerobic digester. And this is still in the very early pre-startup phase. So we're still trying to draft a solution for it, but right now we're just collecting data on, where is everything located? What would be the best place? Do we need 1, 2, 3? What's the amount of organic waste coming in? What's the quality of it? And once we can get that information, then we'll be able to better decide okay, well, we need this type of equipment. We need this many tanks. We need this many locations. But right now the project is for central Minnesota specifically, and then it'll expand in the future.
Thank you.
I can jump in with a quick question. So, obviously the technology has been around for a while, anaerobic digestion. Have you kind of looked at what have been the reasons why it hasn't moved forward? I mean, you talk about it's kind of a panacea, right? Self-sustaining, free input feedstock to the process. What have you identified as having been the reasons why this hasn't moved forward in the past?
So it's actually taken a huge step in Europe. I know a lot of European countries they're already way ahead of the US when it comes to anaerobic digestion with just how many they've implemented overall over the last few years. And I think the US, maybe not as much in Minnesota, but I know like in the South, I know in California, it's a big thing right now. But they're slowly starting to pick it up. Like there's not really any problems with the technology itself. Like it's not super hard to implement. It's not, like there's not really much research that needs to be done on viability. It's more of like, we need to start moving people towards this. So that's the process. What we're trying to do is trying to educate people on what exactly it is and why we should be moving from composting over to anaerobic digestion, and just showing those statistics. But there's not really anything holding back the technology so far.
Thank you.
Great, and I think that's all the time we have for questions. So now if the judges would like to introduce themselves. And I'll screen share.
Nina, start us out again. Help us
Yeah,
out. Oh,
thank you.
go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Panda. I am a Sustainability and Strategy Manager at 3M. Previously, I worked at Nike in sustainability at the European headquarters. And originally I went to the U of M and I'm a graduate from Carlson. So happy to be here. I think this is my third time joining for this session. So happy to be here and get to hear your presentations.
I can go next. Dan Cross. I'm a graduate of the University of Minnesota some decades ago. We used to call it the Institute of Technology. Not sure it's still called Institute of Technology. A civil engineering degree. Have worked in a various capacity in construction throughout my career, but currently the last 15 years I've been working for Mortenson in their renewable energy businesses, wind and so now utility scale solar energy.
I can go next. I'm Amanda Yates, also with 3M. So I work with Nina, who previously introduced herself in the global sustainability team. I'm not a native Minnesotan. I didn't go to U of M, but have an undergraduate degree in environmental science from the University of Notre Dame and spent some years with Anheuser-Busch in their theme park division working in environmental compliance. And then I took a bit of a right turn, but found my way back to the sustainability space here in the last couple of years. So really excited, as Nina and Dan mentioned, to be here and listening to your presentations. Thanks for having me.
Great, so up next we have Robert Gliski, and he will be presenting on phytoremediation of chloride pollution in surface waters.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Good. Okay, so as mentioned, my name is Robert Gliski. I did a research project on phytoremediation of chloride pollution in surface waters. This was done through the UROP program here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and I was working with a faculty member and graduate student in the Department of Bioproducts and Biosystems Engineering. And next slide. So some background. Who here is excited for springtime? I know I am, although it seems like we got a few days of nice weather and then since then it's just been kind of bad. But one thing that I've been enjoying is taking videos of stormwater on campus just for fun. So the videos you see here just show a lot of water going into the drains. I don't walk to class, I take breaks and I take videos of storm drains. But this is significant to the project because with all the snow melting, we see a lot of water going into our drains and then they are ending up in our freshwater lakes and streams. So one may ask, well, why does this matter? We put millions of pounds of road salts on our roads each year, and these have to go somewhere. So they end up in our lakes. So yeah, if you want to play the videos, otherwise, the next slide. All right, and then so the problem here is that the increased chloride concentrations in the environment have shown to place stress on the environment, harming native aquatic plants and also fish species. So the idea to treat this chloride concentration is to use phytoremediation, which is using plants to treat and control waste. And the plants we used are called halophytes, which are able to survive under highly saline conditions, and they have been shown to reduce salt concentrations in soils, but we're modifying that a bit because we're using them in a hydroponic system. So that means that we're growing them without soil, kind of mimicking what a water treatment process would look like. So the hypothesis for this project was in a hydroponic growing system, halophytic plants will be able to significantly sequester salt from the growing solution into their biomass. And next slide. So we used 3 different plant species: glasswort, cordgrass, and purslane. These are halophytes, as mentioned. And then so for each, the methods was, we had a standard growing solution that was fit with micronutrients needed for plant growth. And then we modified that for 3 trials, a control, 24 micromolar and 100 micromolar chloride concentrations. And these were kind of defined by the EPA at, for chronic standard, maximum standard, and final acute values for chloride concentrations. And then, so if you see on the far left picture, that is 1 plant, 1 trial in its isolated chamber. And then the far right picture is all the trials, all the plants, and kind of what that looked like. So after the plants grew, we were able to know exactly how much salt we put into the jars. So then once we harvested and processed the biomass above, we could figure out how much of the salt ended up in the leaves. And then we used ion chromatography to figure that out. Next slide. So the results, as you see, some of the standard deviations are a bit high, but overall you can see that as the chloride concentrations increased, the plants did a better job at sequestering salt in their biomass, which is really good news. Next slide. And this is that in tabulated form, just to get some more numbers if you're that kind of person. Next slide. So as mentioned, there is a high standard deviation with the trials. So in the future, one could research this again and do more trials and possibly develop a more standardized and focused method. But with these results, you could consider a larger application of this research. So actually putting these plants to use, treating water, or you could modify it and change the plants you're using to possibly treat different things or test out different efficacies. So as mentioned, you could guide research and explore other halophytic plants. And then you could also use this for other pollutants as well, like heavy metals or nitrogen and phosphorus. Next slide. Here are the references that I used throughout the entire research process. And next slide. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
So Robert, the end application, it sounds, I mean, if you think about the process here, I mean, you showed stormwater going down a storm drain here in Minnesota in the spring. You know, your halophyte isn't going to be down at the Mississippi Riverbank to start working with that chloride solution. So is the idea, if you figure or you establish the viability, you take it to an area that is quote unquote polluted and you remediate in a controlled setting, or how do you see the application moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This project was inspired by a design project I did for a different class. So the idea is that we have polluted water bodies already, and we would be kind of maybe pumping water out of those water bodies and cycling them through maybe a greenhouse of sorts, and then putting it back in. So we're just removing the salt. Because we're in Minnesota, it kind of has to be that spring, summer, fall time. We can't do it year round unless we have really big greenhouses. But yeah, the idea is to do it kind of with the existing water bodies that are polluted.
And do the plants themselves become kind of a disposal challenge, or what's
Yeah, that's a good question too. When we were researching the different plant species that we wanted to test in this research, we also looked at end uses. So could they be used for animal feed? Are they viable solutions for like biofuels? So I have like a big literature review on that as well. But I suppose once we get there, then we can figure that out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
If none of the other judges have questions, we can open it to panelists.
If you're an attendee, feel free to put questions in the chat and we can ask them to the presenters or share them afterwards if there's not time.
All right, barring any last minute questions, we will go on to the next presentation. We'll be hearing from Gabby Gutenkauf about choosing personal sustainability. Oh.
I don't have slides. I'm just going to be talking, so feel free to just leave up my name or whatever.
Okay, well, I don't think I can go backwards, but I'll...
It's okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby Gutenkauf. I am a junior at the U majoring in environmental science, policy, and management. And I'm also the president of the Environmental Student Association, which I'll be talking a little bit about today and the projects we've been working on this semester. So when it comes to being sustainable, we often hear the argument, well, I'm just one person. What I do doesn't really matter. Personally, I don't think that's true at all. Every single person can have an impact on our Earth and our environment. If you want to create a more sustainable world, you have to convince more people that the decisions that they make matter. College students face a lot of barriers when it comes to being sustainable. I think that the first of those barriers is knowing that sustainability matters, finding a community to learn more, and deciding to care about it. Sustainability is not just for people in environmentally related majors. And one of the biggest reasons why I've enjoyed being a part of the Environmental Student Association is because of the emphasis it has on inclusion. As a student group that went from being the Environmental Science Policy Management Student Association, which was basically a club for ESPM majors, to now being the Environmental Student Association, or ESA, in 2016. We have consistently worked to reach students in every corner of the University of Minnesota, in all colleges, not just CFANs, and let students know that there is an amazing, welcoming community where they can make friends and learn about sustainability. Now, once you've passed that barrier of being included, what's next? You've made that decision that you want to learn more, talk about sustainability, and take action. This is kind of where ESA comes in the next step of the process. Our meetings don't follow some sort of strict structure. At the beginning of the semester, our first meeting was a time for people to get to know each other and then share about topics they wanted to learn more about or activities they wanted to participate in. This semester, we started with a focus on different aspects of personal sustainability, and we've continued to take actions throughout the semester to allow for ESA members to participate in making sustainable choices. I want to highlight a few of those projects and discussions that ESA has facilitated thus far. Food. Many of you know that the University of Minnesota campus is in a food desert, meaning that we have limited access to affordable and nutritious food. Living in a food desert makes it hard to make sustainable food choices, especially as a college student. Most students buy their groceries from Target or maybe Cub or Fresh Time if they have a car. When you buy from Target, chances are the food that you purchased was shipped from halfway across the country to get to you. That tacks on a whole lot of carbon emissions, even after the emissions associated with food growing and processing packaging itself. ESA has discussed the ways in which we could be more sustainable in our food decisions. We talked about growing our own food and buying from local vendors. But we didn't just talk about these concepts, and as a group, we chose to make a sustainable decision. In a project that we began this semester, we applied for a plot in the West Bank Community Garden, and we are currently planning out the produce that we will plant later this spring when it gets a little bit warmer. Our plan is to have members to help maintain our plot throughout the summer and into the fall until harvest to give people the opportunity to learn about growing their own produce. Our goal is to have a harvest in the fall and host a fun event where we cook a nutritious dinner using the food that we grow. Another area of personal sustainability we have found to be important is in our clothing consumption. Fast fashion, or the practice of mass producing low cost and low quality clothing on the basis of quickly changing trends, is a hot topic this day and age, especially in college. To combat overconsumption and buying fast fashion products, ESA has planned trips to secondhand clothing stores, as well as learning to mend our own clothes or upcycling clothes that no longer fit or are at the end of their life. We have also organized clothing swap events in free stores to allow for students to get rid of clothing that they no longer wear without throwing them in the trash to end up in a landfill. Finally, I want to discuss an element of personal sustainability that isn't always considered to be directly related. I feel that an important aspect of sustainability is finding ways to be connected with the earth and finding opportunities to get outside. ESA hosts hiking trips to local Minnesota state parks and natural areas. In this past spring break, we took a longer trip to Canyonlands National Park in Utah for the opportunity to appreciate the astonishing beauty of our world. Taking the time to step back and see why it is so important to be sustainable and protect our earth is an essential element of understanding your own personal sustainability reasoning. I am proud to be the president of such an amazing student group. And for the rest of the semester and until I graduate next fall, I will continue to advocate that sustainability is for everyone and that the Environmental Student Association is an incredible place to find amazing opportunities to learn about the environment and make sustainable decisions, as well as make amazing friends who are always willing to go on outdoor adventures with you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Gabby, this is Amanda. Thanks for the presentation. It's really, really energizing. So a quick question, I was just curious through the student group, and this may not be part of your charter, but do you have a view to kind of like how far your reach is or how you're influencing other students that perhaps aren't even in the group?
Yeah, of course. So something that we've kind of, or at least personally as the president for this semester, I've been trying to work on is in the past, a lot of our events, such as like trash pickups or maybe the clothing things that we do, events have been centralized to our members. And something that I've been working on this semester is in the events that we hold, reaching out to student groups who are not environmentally based per se, maybe like college groups or just like for specific colleges or just there's so many student groups at the University of Minnesota, so obviously it's hard to reach everyone, but trying to find like different groups of students, maybe depending on the topic. Like we had a guest speaker come in and talk about renewable energy at one of our meetings, and so we kind of invited different student groups that had something to do with energy, and that being in like the school of or the College of like Science and Engineering, because they all kind of tie in. Like I said, there's so many different parts and aspects of sustainability. So yeah, definitely expanding that reach is something that we've been working on.
Great, thanks.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the presentation. It sounds like the ESA is creating a great community. How did you decide these topics that you focused on around kind of food, apparel, and nature?
Yeah, so basically I decided on these topics mainly because I think especially, well, as far as food and clothing goes, those are something that college students interact with on a very high level on the day-to-day. And especially like with food, when you're coming to college, you used to maybe have your parents cook for you, and now you're the ones getting to make the decisions. And so if you can kind of reach out to college students and help them understand how to make more sustainable decisions, that's a really good like facet that you can get to. And then clothing too, I think that especially fast fashion is just super prevalent within college. College students are on a budget. They want to buy, cheaper clothing that they also really like. And so just kind of talking about that and finding ways for students to not have to, resort to fast fashion as their like main source of clothing. And then nature and like getting outside, I think is just really important in general. Like I said, it's hard to like want to make sustainable decisions if you can't physically like see what you're doing it for. So I think that like going outside and being like, this is like what I have to appreciate, and just like understanding that is really good and beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gabby, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned that, at your initial meeting of the year, you got together and kind of polled those that came together for this group, what topics they wanted to learn more about. What else is on your list from that list?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have like a whole document with every topic that we talked about. We had basically all of our members, we sent out like during the first meeting, we had everyone like put topics that they wanted to learn more about on like a little form so that we could have those results. It is like 2 pages long of everything that people want to learn about. And so, I mean, obviously we try to cover as many of the topics as we can because they're also very important. But other than the things that I talked about, we've kind of done different meetings centered around topics, sometimes bringing in guest speakers or just having discussions around like what we know, what people have learned in classes. Some of those have been like renewable energy, like I mentioned. Some of them have been like protecting our natural areas. So we've talked about protecting the boundary waters, and then different other environmental issues like Line 3 and things that go around like oil pipelines and such. And that's just a few of many, many topics that all of our members are interested in learning about.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Gabby. And if there are no other questions, we will go on to the next presentation. We will be hearing from Isaac Mastalowski, promoting a plastic circular economy through pyrolysis.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you. So as she mentioned, my name is Isaac Mastalowski, and I'll be presenting on my work as a grad student in the chemical engineering department here. So if we go to the next slide, I think we can safely say that everyone in this room is probably aware of the challenges with plastic waste that we're facing today. This slide just puts a few numbers to that. So starting from the top left, we can see that about 8 billion tons of plastic have been produced since 1950, which is when we started mass producing plastic at a large scale. Yet less than 10% of all that plastic has ever been recycled. Of the plastics that we've made, polyethylene, PE, and polypropylene, PP, are the two most common types, and they account for about 50% of all plastic that is made. And breaking down that further, single-use plastics, which are things like packaging materials, account for about 40% of all plastic waste. And those are almost exclusively made of PE and PP. Of the plastic waste that is made, as I mentioned, less than 10% is recycled. So that means most of it just ends up being discarded, and it goes straight into landfills or the oceans, polluting the environment. And in fact, it's estimated that by the year 2050, plastics will outweigh fish in the ocean. And these are just some sobering reminders of the challenges we face right now. And on the next slide, that doesn't just have to be a challenge. We also have an opportunity to make a big difference with that. And that can come from a technique known as pyrolysis. So of the about 10% of plastic that has been recycled, it has exclusively gone through mechanical recycling means, which is when you grind it down into small particles and dissolve them or melt them down and then extrude it into new plastics. But that requires initial separation and cleaning, and it degrades the structural integrity of plastic with every cycle through that process. So that means it's easy to scale up, but it's inefficient because plastics can only go through that process a few times before their quality is too low to keep being recycled. With a chemical recycling method like pyrolysis, we don't have any of those limitations. There's no separation or cleaning required at the beginning, and it's able to generate pure plastic monomers, which are the building blocks to make new plastics. It's also cost and energy efficient and scalable. So it's significantly better than mechanical recycling means. But how can we effectively accomplish pyrolysis? And if we go to the next slide, we can see this is the reactor that I've been using in my lab. It is called Pulse Heated Analysis of Solid Reactions, or PHASER. And it's what I've spent the last 4 or so years working on. And it's a kind of revolutionary technique that our group developed to conduct reactions of plastic in controlled pulses with no heat or mass transfer limitations. So all of that is basically just a way to say that we are measuring something called the intrinsic kinetics of how pyrolysis occurs. And traditional systems that have been used so far to study pyrolysis are not able to measure these intrinsic kinetics. They measure what's called the apparent kinetics, which are not very useful for scaling the process up into designing industrial reactors. But the information that we have been able to obtain using this unique system is very useful for that. And if we go to the next slide, we can see how that works. So starting on the left with plastic waste like water bottles, that's made up of polymers like polyethylene and polypropylene. Using our phaser reactor shown at the top, the plastic waste can be pyrolyzed using lab scale methods. And then that lab scale data can inform industrial reactor design. So for example, we can break down the polymers on the left into the monomers on the far right. And those are ethylene and propylene molecules, which would be used to make new plastics. So using our lab scale data, we can produce those monomers and then feed that into industrial sized reactors. And I apologize, the slides are a bit messed up here. But then we can use those industrial reactors to make new plastics exclusively from recycled material. And that will enable us to use a plastic circular economy instead of the linear economy where almost everything is just thrown away into landfills that we are currently using. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
I'll jump in, Isaac.
Sure.
Interesting topic. So the pyrolysis that I'm familiar of is probably now technology 20, 30 years old, but kiln-driven recycle of waste tires. So I can picture that in my head scale. I mean, that was a conveyor-driven concept into a basically a furnace, and then the reaction occurred there. I'm having a hard time picturing even running a milk carton through your lab mock-up there. So how does it scale? What will it look like when it scales? Yeah,
so it would kind of look like what you are picturing, I think, because the reactor we use, it's only for a lab scale. You can't really scale it up because how it works is heating the sample with really high current pulses of electricity. So you wouldn't be able to use that on large samples like milk cartons or water bottles or something. Instead, we use the data from our system to design large-scale systems like the one you're thinking of, because the current data that people report in the literature is not very good for that. Because they're measuring the apparent kinetics, it's very dependent on the particular system and characteristics of the system that they are studying. Whereas the data that we have, the intrinsic kinetics, it can be applied to any system using different kinds of models. So to scale it up, we would be able to work with a company, say a large plastic recycler, tell them this is how the plastic will break down and what kind of rates and temperatures you need to operate at, and then they can build their reactor based on that.
And you mentioned energy efficient, so you've been able to conceive of this pulse of electricity, how that's going to be efficiently used in that scenario?
Yeah, so the electricity that we use probably isn't what they would use. They would probably just use more like heating jackets around their reactors or using like high pressure steam. That could be generated through boilers or through renewable means like solar panels or wind energy or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
And on that energy topic, how does it compare to traditional recycling methods, the amount needed?
We haven't done any, put any numbers to that yet, but the idea is with mechanical recycling, first it has to go through lots of separation stages and cleaning because you can't bundle together different kinds of plastic at once. But with pyrolysis, it doesn't really matter if the plastic's dirty or if it's mixed with other kinds. If we can figure out the different rates for each type of plastic, so far I've been working just on polyethylene, but if we can figure that out for a wider range of plastics, we could throw it all in at once and we'd know what the rates are for each different type, and then we could tailor the reaction conditions to that specifically. So in theory, it should be much more efficient because you don't have to separate anything. And separation is always one of the most energy and time intensive stages of any chemical process.
Thank you.
don't know if we have time for one more question or not. I'll just go for it. They can tell us no. I was just curious, with what's, sort of currently a pretty limited availability of chemical recycling out there. I was just wondering, of your perspective of, how like the uptake of this when ready might, help resolve that like accessibility or the ability to implement by, existing recycling, systems, what have you.
So I think one of the benefits of this is it could kind of be a drop-in technology where they could use existing systems that they have in place and just be able to apply the models and the kinetics that we come up with to their system. Eventually, we would also hope to be able to throw in some catalysts to make the process even more efficient. But that's one of the future steps that I'm actively working on.
Thanks.
A quick follow-up question. So is one of your findings actually then that we're kind of killing a fly with a sledgehammer in the old energy use and pyrolysis? I mean, that your discovery is all that energy because it doesn't really address, what the mechanism is that you're finding you can consult or advise on the design of different systems that use less energy?
Yeah, that's kind of the goal, because we have, like I said, the data we're getting is more independent of the underlying characteristics of the system we're using. So it could be applied much more broadly than current techniques, which, because they're more specific to the system, if you apply it, if, for example, a company develops a pyrolysis process right now, that isn't readily transferable to another company's process because it'll be all based on their starting materials and their reactors and everything. So yeah, hopefully this would be a much more effective way to scale up processes like this.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Isaac.
Thank
And
you.
if there are no other questions, we will go on to the next presentation. Maybe. So next is Audrey Robson, talking about bouncing forward resilience hubs for the community.
Hi, everybody. My name is Audrey. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Natural Resource Science and Management program. And like Erica said, my presentation is on bouncing forward, resilience hubs, and I'll get a little bit into what they are. I did probably get a little ambitious with the number of slides I have, so we'll see how far we get. So this is just an overview of what the presentation will hopefully cover. We can go on to the next slide. And the next one too. So first I want to go over what a resilience hub is. So resilience hubs are physical spaces that are hardened to withstand most natural hazards and weather events. They are, or I guess I should start with what resilience actually is. So resilience is defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And that usually includes disasters. And year-round, whether there is a disaster or not, these facilities are meant to be community serving by supporting residents, distributing resources, serving as communication centers, and then also helping to reduce local emissions in terms of travel distance for folks. Next slide. So these spaces are meant to be equity centered and equity first. They should be shifting the power to local communities in terms of the decision-making processes, and they should be also co-managed with the community in mind. And so they should be developed in collaboration with residents, and specifically they should be first done in BIPOC neighborhoods, centering the folks that are usually disproportionately impacted by disasters. So the services that should be tailored to meet the needs of the population, and then they should also help to resolve and reduce the disproportionate access to opportunities and resources available. Next slide. And so this section will cover response and recovery and how resilience hubs will increase emergency management capacity. Next slide, yeah. And so that starts pre-disruption. So before any disaster, the best response is to invest in networking and planning. And so these spaces can serve as centers to facilitate those kinds of conversations with folks in local businesses, nonprofits, community leaders, as well as city, county, and state staff. Next slide. And so when a disaster inevitably happens, these spaces can help in terms of capacity building, where residential leaders and emergency personnel can have a place to operate out of and support immediate needs. They're also equipped with really good communications tools and technology so that these hubs can serve as the center of communication, especially for residents in that area. And then residents can also come to these spaces and as they serve as access to shelter, food, water, medical supplies, and emergency personnel will also be on staff to assist as needed. Next slide. And then as you transition from a response to a recovery mode, these hubs can continue to support via resource delivery and distribution, access to support, whether that be talks and seminars, as well as group support for processing the trauma and the shared grief that happens after a disaster, and then the technical support of developing forms and filling out those really complex FEMA insurance and other relief forms. Next. And then the other aspect of resilience hubs is that they ought to be community serving first. And so some of the things that resilience hubs can help facilitate are health and safety in terms of food drives, access to public restrooms and first aid, as well as rec and wellness activities, education in terms of classes, pamphlets, information, and presentations, but also computers and printing services for folks that might not have other access to that. Sustainability in terms of solar and battery backups, they're kind of a lead-in example of that in a neighborhood. Economic opportunities through financial education, classes on financial stability, economic development projects and collaboration. And then along with that collaborative space is just meeting spaces and places to talk and innovate through activities. And so it becomes really a place for folks to think more broadly. Yeah, next slide, that's fine. And then really quickly, there are three case studies that I'm hoping to do research on in the Minneapolis area. We can go to the next one. So Sabathani, there's a currently established community center where Resilience Hubs is being built into it, and the center is being hardened. Little Earth, where there's weatherization happening on the residential side, but also on the currently existing community center. And then in North Minneapolis, there's a partnership to develop economic development alongside a public school system where the Resilience Hub will be happening. And that's it. Did anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything?
I can start, Audrey. Thanks for the presentation. So how is this concept a departure or building upon like what we would typically think following a disaster? You know, the Red Cross comes in and helps provide a lot of those services. What do you think is the kind of the breakthrough or the nuance in what you're proposing here?
Yeah, so Resilience Hubs kind of help to further that as a physical place for the Red Cross and other kinds of nonprofit organizations to operate out of. They become these sites where residents know of and have a lot of pride in place because they are established with the community. And so there's a lot of trust that happens in those sites that might not otherwise happen. And then they're just like that physical location where folks know to go to in the event that a disaster does happen. So they kind of expand upon the current services that might be offered after a disaster from those kinds of places.
And what, go ahead.
Just going to ask a bit of a follow-up question is, you know, typically where this perhaps has been successful or how you might imagine it, is it typically relying on sort of like nonprofit engagement to help support and run or facilitate, or is it usually like local governments, or how do you see it sort of being funded and delivered?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently, a lot of the leading efforts around resilience hubs are coming out of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is predominantly local government. But these sites can't really happen unless they're in partnership with local nonprofit organizations, especially when it comes to distributing resources. And so usually they happen in some kind of private-public partnership in collaboration, which I didn't really have a chance to include that in the slides, but that's also a really cool aspect of these hubs, is that you do get to see those partnerships happen. And it takes a lot of different moving parts to make them happen.
Thank you.
I think finding that path to collaboration is probably the key to your concept here. A lot of people want to build facilities and cover a lot of these different areas, but it could be a real efficiency if you could get them to work together.
Yeah, and all in one place is really kind of useful, so you don't have to find various sites to do all these different kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any last questions? All right. So I think we might be missing our last presenter. I'm not sure. Is Novi the last presenter?
Yes. But
Okay.
I don't think Novi's on the call.
Okay.
So maybe we could take our presenter photo right now. And then if Novi joins in the next few minutes, we can go ahead and listen to that presentation. And if not, revisit other questions or have a longer break before the panel.
Sounds good.